Come on, guys.
All right, come on.
Music. Woo!
Thank you. All right. So we're here today to talk about beer, quite obviously, right? Yeah? So this talk is titled Creating Strategic Shifts Towards the Edge of Innovation. I think it's more about inspiration than it is about actually creating strategy and shifts. And that's why I include beer, because, well, beer helps everything. But it's also got an alternate title, which is really how to become a superhero or empower superheroes on your teams. It all starts at the very, very beginning. There was the Big Bang, and then we were kids. And you remember as kids, you'd play whatever games you were playing, hopscotch, you would draw lines, right? You'd create constraints for yourselves, but you believed it. You played. You just did things as they felt natural to you. You might look up at the sky and imagine different worlds, imagine what's going on. Certainly you built these worlds with your friends. It wasn't just you all the time. Often if you had a nice group of friends, you'd build these worlds, and you were diverse in how you'd build these worlds. You'd create something different, something new for yourselves every time. Or maybe you really just were in your backyard and doing this. I did a lot of this in my own room. And you were building worlds all by yourself, and they just kept going and going and going. You lived them. In fact, I would wake up and sort of go back to the world I created the day before and keep going and going and going and going. And you lived inside of these worlds. And the key to all this, and sort of most of us lived this imaginary existence. And we became superheroes in our own right? We could actually make change. We could create new things. We could save the world. We could save our lost love, whatever it looked like, right? And so whether you were Superman or Wonder Woman or Batman or Catwoman or whoever it may be, right? We were superheroes. The key to all of this was that we just lived in these worlds. We lived them. We believed them. It wasn't that we just heard about Superman or heard about Wonder Woman or whoever it might be. We lived inside of the worlds we built, and we just kept going with that belief and how we lived. Personally, I really was Superman when I was a kid. This is not just a Halloween costume. I would show up to kindergarten all the way into first grade actually wearing this underneath my regular outfit. And sometimes I would go into the bathroom and take off my clothes, and out would come Superman. And so this was me in kindergarten. But at some point, after all of the creativity was beaten out of me, I noticed that, it was beaten out of a lot of people too. And we see things like this. So these are visions that I've come across in my work. Here's a nice vision. In 3 years, we're going to move our entire business to subscription. So fucking what? So what? What does this mean? What does this mean to anyone? Or this one. Everything's going to run on the cloud. Okay. So I heard that. I understand what you're saying. So what? What does this mean? Why? Or this one, my personal favorite. I'm an American, right? And I live in the U.S. This is my personal favorite from, I'm sure, many people's personal hero. Anyone know who this is? Who said this? Donald Trump, right? He's going to make change, and everyone is going to live this change by creating this whole new environment for us. But it means nothing. It means nothing to anyone. Whether it's real, whether it's someone you like or dislike, it doesn't really mean anything, because the tack that we take often, especially after we're kids, right, is this one, which is we prepare the statement, we prepare the strategy, and then we believe it just needs to be executed. That's it. We don't need anything else. We believe this thing needs to happen, and so we just put it out there, and it's going to happen. But that's not right? We know that this doesn't work. We know that the preparing the strategy and executing the strategy, this is where things fail every single time. It's not inspirational either. One of my favorite graphics is from a design firm called Explain, and they sort of think through the degree of support you're going to get over time and how you actually can help to inspire people over time. And it doesn't stop with hearing, right? It doesn't stop with, we're going to change the world and that's it. Go change the world, right? It goes all the way to you have to get people to want to live it. But what we see often is this. just like this. We have a forum. We say, this is what it's going to do. This is where our company is going to go. And our organization should look something like this. So how do we get there? We're done. We're going to get there, right? And we get people hearing. And seldom do we get to this place where people actually believe in the thing that you're talking about. And even less often do we get to a place where people actually live inside of that thing that we're asking them to build for us, the strategy, those shifts that we ask them to build for us. But we've known this for a long time. Peter Drucker, I don't know if he's anyone's hero, I'm not sure. But this is true. Every single day, culture eats strategy for breakfast. No matter what we say inside of our organizations, the culture is going to eat that thing up. And it might love it, right? It might do something with that thing, but often it doesn't. So in my experience, the way to actually inspire people to make shifts, the way to inspire people to do things that are beneficial for our companies is teamwork, is bringing people together to actually, just like when we were kids, start to create the worlds that we want to live in. And the teams shouldn't look like this, by the way, right? This is the most homogeneous team ever. It's homogeneous, right? There's a bunch of white people. Yeah, it's a mix of women and men, but they suck. These people get shit done every single day, and they actually probably need more women on this team for sure. But when this was shot in the 80s, I think that probably wasn't something we talked about quite as much. But look at this team. These are badasses. They do different things. They have different skills. They don't always get along. In fact, most of the time, they don't get along. Right? You look at B.A. Baracus. Everyone is scared of him, but that's because he makes bombs. And, well, in that case, he did a good job doing those things. And they have certainly a leader. They certainly have a leader, but, you know, he also empowers people to actually make the choices that they're going to make because they have these superpowers. These same people then, so we'd be louder. Let's be louder. These same people then are empowered to tell stories, and telling those stories actually bring other people into their cause, bring other people into wanting to be part of this super team. And if those stories, then they can create visions, and with those visions, then they can empower even more people. This, by the way, is a vision from a client I worked with called ING Bank. How many people have heard of ING Bank? Everyone, right? ING Bank wanted to inspire people to actually want to change the bank for good, to change it and do something different. And they did so by bringing people together to create these stories, to create these visions, and not just as a big monolithic document, but like this, visually. But you can't stop with vision, right? Just like I'm talking to you, you can't stop with just bringing people together to create the story. That's only part of it. You have to also bring them together at different times to then take that story and go levels deeper. Perhaps part of that going deeper is understanding the broader context that they live in. What is that context that they live in or the business lives in? It's maybe about the competitors, maybe it's about the demographics, maybe it's about the business models they're working on or whatever it might be. But you have to be able to bring people together at different times to actually start creating what do these shifts look like. And what are the forces that are working upon us that are going to help us or hinder us in those shifts? And just like you wouldn't build a house without one of these, or perhaps one of these, you also, need to be able to go about building strategy and these shifts and visions and everything else with tools. And there's tons and tons and tons of tools out there to help your teams actually come together to have the right strategic conversations at the right time and place, enabling them to actually make the right decisions for your organizations. Some of those look like this. So this is what ING used. This is called a 5 bold steps vision canvas. It doesn't really matter. It's a tool. But what it enabled them to do was come up with something that was more than a vision statement. I will do this thing in 3 years or 5 years or whatever. But with how do we show up in the markets that we play? Who do we actually want to be? And how do we start not just believing, but living this dream of who we could actually become? There's things like this, which is, well, maybe we could take that thing, that vision that we created and start developing stories around it. And stories aren't just storybooks. Stories have beginnings, middle, and an end, and they have goals. They have purposes. Why would we tell the story in the first place? And so there are lots of tools to help teams do the same thing. And that way you're also not just giving someone one task and saying, okay, marketing department, go create the story. You're giving everyone the task to create the story. And then, of course, my personal favorite, I come from a company called Business Models, Inc. There are things like business model canvases, which are about then taking these stories, taking these visions, taking these contextual elements and making them concrete. How are we going to do this thing that we've now set out to do in these years? What could this actually look like? And again, it's about co-creation. It's about bringing people together to create the shifts that they actually want to live in. In all of this, everything starts with a point of view. And a point of view is at the center of everyone, right? We all come at everything with a point of view. There is no such thing as going into any company, anywhere, with a blank sheet of paper. That doesn't exist. The design process in general, if you think about things like design thinking, is all centered around who are we? What point of view do we come to the table with? But then it's about empowering people to explore beyond that point of view. Where do we actually live? What is that context? Could we actually come together and create new ideas for our future, especially if we have a team like the A team that has lots of different capabilities, lots of different skills, lots of different mindsets that they could bring to the table. If you can do that, then you can also start to prototype and validate what are these strategic visions, what are the business models that we may actually want to be able to use that's going to get us there. And they may look very different than they did yesterday. There is no need to irradiate ourselves with gamma rays or anything like that to become the Incredible Hulk here either. We can just do this as teams. Tons of inspiring examples exist out there. Here are a few, and these are big companies that I'm not sure you knew are not just big because, well, they're hot. It's big because they actually have visions that people live every single day within them. Amazon seeks, their vision is to be the most customer-centric company on the globe, on Earth. And they live it every single day. This guy, Jeff Bezos, he actually personally, just 3 weeks ago, helped to find someone's dog that was a customer of his. They were frantic. They emailed Jeff Bezos directly. He reads emails directly, and he did the legwork to actually help find her dog that was stolen by a delivery person from one of the services they use, which was not a very customer-centric thing to do. But he helped to find a dog, and he inspires people to do the same. Spend time, make it right for people when things go wrong. This is Mary Barra. She works for GM. She's the CEO of GM. She doesn't work for it. She is GM in many ways. She started in the shop at GM as a kid. She worked her all the way up to CEO, and what she learned along the way was it's not about telling people what to do, but it's about mentoring people and nurturing them and giving them the chance to create the future that GM needs to be. And she does this every day. And when you talk to people at GM, you learn like she is that person. She is a coach, she is a mentor, and she gives people the ability to make decisions. Now, she also makes really hard decisions for GM, but at the same time, then she spreads the love and says, help me make this decision, help me live this decision with your own ideas about how we might do that. This is Tony Hsieh from Zappos. Everyone should know by now that this really is probably one of the most customer-centric companies in the world, but it isn't about customer centrism in this case that I think is important. Tony Hsieh believes that the company can actually create and recreate itself. In fact, he is totally okay giving purview to everyone at the company to make decisions together as teams about who that company is going to be. It's totally radical. Now, of course, there's challenges in that because their vision may change a lot. They are totally willing to fail. In fact, he fails all the time at this stuff, and people ding him in the media. But his goal is not just to become a giant company, but is to allow change to happen inside of the company and from the inside out. This guy I call Metro Man. This is Vernon Hill from Metro Bank. he was so fed up with the way that banks work that he actually left a giant bank in the UK and went through some other changes in life to then reform a brand new bank called Metro Bank. And his whole hypothesis was banks suck because they don't focus on people first, they focus on money first. But what if we created a bank that really worked just like a McDonald's or a Starbucks or a hardware store that's open when people are needing the bank and actually focuses on people and the lives that they have and want to live, and banking is just a part of that, and having money is just a part of that. And so his bank, he allows the employees at the branches to actually design what that bank should look like. In fact, they allow dogs in every single branch, and they have a dog-friendly policy. They're open on Sundays because it's like, well, if I'm going to Starbucks, I could stop at the bank. Why shouldn't the bank be open just like a Starbucks? And so he follows the same policies and allows people to actually create that with him. And finally, one of the most unlikely characters, this is Richard von Delden from a commercial piping manufacturer called Wavin. And he was the CFO of Wavin. So not even one of these extreme leader CEOs. He was the CFO. But what he found was people kept following this straight line, this prepare the strategy and execute the strategy, and they were failing big time in Europe, in some very specific markets in Europe. And he thought, well, what could change? How could we change this? I got it. What if we stopped preparing the strategy and executing the strategy, and we gave people a chance inside of this company to explore other options? What options might exist that we could actually look at, prototype, validate, that might turn into something else? And in fact, what they found was where they were preparing the strategy and executing a strategy, one that was going to cost them $60 million at one point in time to build a new factory in Istanbul, he allowed a team to come up with new options that they validated that turns out, well, they could actually build something very different, which turned out to be an Apple store for plumbers in many respects that was super cheap, like $40,000, that has now turned this business, which was number 6 in this giant market in Turkey, into something like number 2. So he gave people this ability to come together as teams to build new options. In all of this, the world is certainly changing, right? Uncertainty exists. We know this exists. This whole conference is about surreptitious meeting and sharing and connecting. And we do this because of this, right? Because uncertainty actually exists and things are changing. And if we don't get ahead of changes or we don't make the changes, they're going to change on us, and they're probably not good changes. In my mind, in my experience, then, the only way to deal with these changes is together. And this goes, not only together outside of organizations, but definitely together inside of the organizations that we exist in, right? Creating teams and allowing people to actually come together to create something new. And in creating something new, it's not creating new business plans. It's not creating new things that we're going to send en masse to everyone that's, hey, read this 600-page document. It should tell you everything you need to know. But it's about coming together to using tools, using other things, having the right strategic conversations at the right time and right place to give people this sense that they can actually believe in something, that they can believe that they're making change for good inside of that company and out. And in doing that, they'll begin to actually live that change. And perhaps you create a few superheroes along the way. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Justin. I feel so energized just listening to you. I want to be a superhero. Do my superhero stance. Okay, guys, do we have any questions for Justin while you have him here over in the corner?
And I only have 3 answers. It's yes, no, or maybe.
That's amazing, thank you. I'm pretty aware in a global aspect of different things. How is it that I didn't know any of those people? Why is that all those people that you put up in cartoons are not widely known about? How's that possible?
Oh, why are they not widely known about? I think, well, certainly you probably know some of the companies they're part of. I think everyone probably heard that. So you know the companies that they work for, that they lead, but no one talks about the heroes in them and why they're heroes. In fact, there was a panel yesterday that was about cultural fuck-ups, basically. And what came out, one thing I learned in that panel that really resonated, and I think answers your question, is we're so used to reading media and even like creating the bad stories, right? Creating the things like, oh, well, Amazon did this, or they did that, or they're going to do this, or they're going to beat them, or these people aren't going to make up the time because blah, 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 without really saying, there's heroes here. There's people that are doing incredible work, and they may be the leaders, they may be other people, but it's about telling the hero stories and not always the villain stories is what I got out of that. And so I don't know why you don't hear that, but it's easy to find this stuff, by the way. You can do a quick Google search and find this information. You'll find the heroes in every case.
Someone else?
Thanks for that. That was awesome. What's your suggestion for really large organizations that want to change tack and want to implement some of these strategies, but they have such legacy mindsets and systems and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I work with these same companies and really, really large companies every day. First of all, the company has to ask itself, do we really want to change? When I work with banks, often banks say that, but it's lip service because someone else has told them, yeah, you should probably change. Millennials, online, apps. Do they really want to change? And if they can ask themselves, do they really want to change? And I'm saying at the very top, for instance, but it could also be somewhere in the middle. If they can ask themselves and answer truthfully, yeah, we really do need to change and we want to do that now, then it often starts by actually bringing people together and creating spaces where they can actually start to co-create that stuff. So in my world, that looks like workshops. In my world, I worked with BNP Paribas Fortis, giant bank, French and Belgian bank. And we brought together the executive team first. We started to hash out what do visions look like? Where do you really want to be? But then we realized it couldn't stop with, of course, the executive team. We didn't just realize this. We designed it in. You can't just stop with the executive team. You've got to then bring the management layer in because mid-level managers often not only are not inspired to make change, but they're not paid to make change. They're paid to make things stable. And so we brought the mid-level management in, about 400 people at a time, to help, if the management team could create a vision, how do the mid-level managers see themselves and design themselves into that vision and become excited about that? And you could sort of start to see that groundswell, well, it was actually more of a wind right from the very top, but sort of start to cascade down. Now, it doesn't mean that they're super successful always. In fact, many things are 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But it starts with the company asking itself critically, do we really want to make a change right now? Is this the time? And if we do, how do we bring the right people together to have those conversations and then design some kind of flow so that we can get everyone together so that they can start to design around it? Yeah, hopefully that helps.
I've got a question.
Okay.
But I'll leave it over to the audience first. Yeah.
So we've heard about giant organizations, big corporates, big companies trying to make change in their own way, right? And more often than not, it's in my experience, it's not a successful sort of transition. And we've heard stories about how multi-year, multi-million sort of initiatives have failed, right?
Totally.
I'm trying to explore a question here, which is, there must be a point where the organization says, this is it, we can't actually change because the baggage is too much. How about we start from scratch? We start with a new company, same industry, same market idea, and so on and so forth, but essentially start a new company and then build from ground up. You've got the IP, you've got the people. Have you seen any of these sort of examples?
Yeah, I've never seen a whole big company make that change. We hear lip service to it. So Ford, the auto manufacturer, is calling itself a tech company now. I think BMW is calling itself a mobility company and no longer an auto manufacturer. So we see threads of that, right? Same, these are 2 auto manufacturers, so the same market, but now thinking it's a little bit different. What you're not seeing is that under the covers, there's still a bunch of white dudes who love driving and making cars. And it's mostly white dudes. I've never really seen a big company make that kind of shift. What I have seen, however, are companies inside, the organizations inside of these companies really making pretty big shifts. So creating new products and services totally outside of the domain of where they started and trying new things. It doesn't necessarily mean that the company will take that and make that the North Star, but I've seen companies that are well diversified in products and services really trying new things to try out new markets that they want to play in or acquiring companies that they want to play in. I've seen that quite a bit. The only other time I think I've seen a company like burn it all to the ground and start over is actually Kodak, which is is a case for, well, this is what happens when you don't do a digital camera and now you've burnt your entire existence. You're starting to see Kodak actually make a comeback because they're starting to talk about blockchain or whatever they want to talk about, but to help photographers, lock down their photos and manage their photo, the sort of digital rights management stuff. So maybe Kodak will make it, probably not, but it's a company that was burned to the ground, against their own, judgment, right? And now they're trying to rebuild something new in a similar space.
I had a quick question for people who, it doesn't always have to come from the top, but it does have to involve the leadership. If there's someone in the audience who wants to make that change or wants to be that superhero, what advice would you give them to kind of go, how do I get my leadership buy-in on this?
Yeah, so I used to live that. So you've got Autodesk here. I used to work for Autodesk, and I was on a product team, and I was a senior product manager and product strategist, and I found that there were shifts that I wanted to make. Some of them were successful, and some of them weren't so successful. But it actually, I can only tell you from my experience, is that it starts with your passion. It starts with this point of view. And then it goes from your point of view and trying to figure out, well, who are my allies on this that I can bring into this, that we could get excited about just trying something. I think especially at big companies, you're in the middle of this company somewhere, and maybe even, on the shop room floor, and you feel like there should be some change. You don't have to think about it in a monolithic way. You use your head, you think, oh, well, we could try some little things, right? We could try a few small things, see how people feel about them. We could prototype this thing and validate it by just putting something out there and seeing how people react to it, and you'll learn through that. So, and I had that sort of double looping slide. That's what that's all about. And so I've done that, and I've seen, lots of really successful intrapreneurs inside of companies doing the same thing, not taking this monolithic approach like come hell or high water, we have to change, but hey, I've got an idea. How can I test this really quickly, bring in allies to continue to build it, and then pitch it back to my management to make it happen?
So we use the business model canvas all the time as mentors in startup weekends and things like that. It's part of our toolkit.
Yeah.
And
it's the hammer.
Yeah, it's the hammer. Everything else is a nail. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I guess, and also some of us have also just listened to Carla's conversation about social capital, and which is obviously a major part of being a superhero, is having the following so that you can be Tesla and sell flamethrowers. Like that kind of silly stuff that tends to happen around that. Is there a superhero canvas?
Is there a superhero canvas? There actually is a superhero canvas. So the one canvas I'd say is a really great superhero canvas is something called the cover story canvas. By the way, all these canvases, again, they are just tools. They can't do anything for you. They can only inspire you to have those conversations. There's something called the cover story canvas, which is all about strategic visioning in some time frame, in some timeline, and it's about bringing people together to create what does the magazine cover look like in this imagined future that you want to be part of. And what you see in that is that people will design these magazines, 15 years out or whatever, as artifacts from the future. And they will absolutely design themselves in there as superheroes. And they will design the company in as part of the superhero. Or they will design the CEO of the company in as a superhero, and they become the power friends that help to make that happen. It is absolutely a superhero canvas. it works every time to inspire people. Now, you have to take that and create something from that, but it's called the cover story canvas. All of these, by the way, are available. All these canvases and tools I talk about, they're available out there. If you go to www.designabetterbusiness.com, shameless plug because that's where you can find these two. We put them up free on there, designabetterbusiness.com, and that one's up there too.
Cool. I think we've got time for a couple more,
okay.
or one more, maybe in the corner there.
Hi, Justin.
Hey, Stefan.
So I have a quick question. So one of the things I observe with all these canvases is usually the more vocal people, they'll put much more stickies, whereas those who tend to be a little bit more introverted, they tend to keep the ideas to themselves, or they tend to talk about the ideas, but they don't put it up. So what are some of the strategies that you get some of these folks who are involved in this change teams or design teams more motivated and inspired to, create the future that they want?
Yeah, it's also a really good question. You have to design for that. You have to design for extroverts and introverts. And one way to do that is not have everyone talking all at the same time. It's actually for instance, in my world, one of the tools I use a lot, all the time, are Post-its and markers, Post-its and Sharpies. And when you give people these to people and you give them prompts, it's not just everything's a blank sheet of paper, but you give them prompts, what you'll find are both extroverts and introverts will put everything down that they're interested in. Now, it doesn't mean that the extroverts won't stand up and say, my Post-it, my Post-it. But what it does mean is that you'll still get an equal amount of ideas from everyone. And then if you can design for taking those ideas and turning them into something else, then you've leveled the playing field and everyone gets their chance.
Okay.
Sorry to ask another question. Just for your knowledge, Engie was the company that totally did refine. They shut down a 1.4 gigawatt power station in Latrobe, so they cut their whole reliance from their global network against coal. So that's Engie, E-N-G-I-E. So there is an example. Sorry to correct you. And the question is, it's a very interesting point. You said we see the mainstream media now that the villains are the ones that are hitting the press all the time.
Yeah,
I've gone from liking Trump to hating him to liking him again, so I'm going to give him a call out. I think he's a hero. How do we affect people that are controlling the media, like Rupert Murdoch and others, to, let's get back to the heroes and stop, making heroes of villains?
I have no answer for that other than stop reading that news. I don't